HPX Susan finale part. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, Harry and Susan's relationship changed. They were noticeably closer. The way they spoke to one another, or the way they sat together during meals. It was clear to anyone who looked at them that something had changed and that it was good. Of course there was loads of speculation, and a lot of it had to do with the sexual nature of their relationship. But only those close to the couple knew exactly what had changed for the two. Now you get to start trying the fun stuff. Hannah grinned as she and Susan walked from Charms to Runes together. Fun stuff? You mean it hasn't been fun yet? Susan asked, a bit surprised. Oh no, that's fun. But now you can grab him and pull him into a broom cupboard for a quickie. Or you can take a late night walk outside and let him ravish you under the stars. Or you can sneak into the prefect's bathroom and... Okay, I get it. Susan laughed and shoved Hannah. You're incorrigible, you know that, don't you? I know. I'm starting to think I'm a nymphomaniac or something. Hannah smirked. Not that Neville's complaining. Why would he? Susan asked. They walked on a bit longer without speaking when Hannah spoke up again. Has Dumbledore told either of you anything else? Susan shook her head, her smile fading at once. It was still a sore subject for Susan. She understood that sometimes people kept things from you to protect. Her aunt was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Susan knew better than most that sometimes secrets were good. But not in this case. At the very least, Harry should have been told a long time ago he was carrying part of Voldemort's soul within him. Dumbledore had chosen not to burden Harry with that information. Noble his intentions were, Susan felt that in the end, it was the wrong choice to make. Susan had noticed that ever since it had all been explained, Harry now appeared as if a giant weight had been lifted. He seemed more cheerful, more at ease. He was like any other teenage boy. Susan wondered how much of this was Dumbledore's explanation, or the fact he was now getting sex. A few of Susan's friends had noted that she seemed more like her usual self. When she asked what they had meant, they had explained that since she'd been with Harry, she seemed as if she had a lot more on her mind. But that now she was herself again. Susan had asked Hannah about it a few days earlier. Yeah, I mean before Harry you were really bubbly and smiling, even when you were sad about Zach. When you and Harry got together. No, even before that. Look, I know it was because of the contract and all, but I've watched how you two have evolved and your feelings have grown. You're happy together, and you're good for each other. He's made you better, just as you've made him better. People don't understand it, but they've noticed the change in both of you. They were talking about it before you two. You know. Hannah had explained. Harry's been training a lot harder these last few weeks. Susan sighed. He's so exhausted. What happened in defense class? I heard Parvati telling some people that he and Snape went round and round again. But that Snape backed down and didn't even get detention or anything. Hannah asked in awe as the two girls took their seats. Susan had not revealed all that she and Harry had learned about Snape and his feelings for Harry's mother. So far as Susan was concerned, it was a private family matter. It had explained a great deal about Snape's behavior towards Harry, which was the stuff of legend. Yet, Susan felt a strange sort of pity for the notoriously bitter teacher. Harry didn't say much about it, but I knew he'd had another go-round. He always looks really angry after defense classes. But he did say that things had changed. I didn't ask any more about it because he looked really angry. and I didn't fancy any more broken ribs. You mean you don't want Harry waiting on you again? Hannah joked. I didn't say that. Susan smirked. The class started and they were prevented from speaking further. Susan had a hard time concentrating in class. She had a hard time concentrating on anything lately, unless Harry was near. Susan could not stop thinking about what might happen to her betrothed when the final confrontation happened. She prayed every night, when she was held tightly in Harry's arms, that she would never have to let him go. She chose to believe that Harry would be powerful enough to defeat the so-called Dark Lord, just as Dumbledore believed. But she wasn't going to chance it. Susan smiled to herself as she thought of the tiny vial of luck potion in her pocket. Dumbledore strode through the halls of the school, heading towards the East Wing. He liked this time of night. As much as he enjoyed hearing the laughter of the young, he found it most peaceful when the children were in their beds. Silence was a blessing at times. And Dumbledore felt that this was indeed in one of those times. He could not be distracted now. This was too important. Dumbledore felt as if he'd been going in circles for a very long time, but a few days after he'd revealed everything to Harry, he'd had a bit of an epiphany. It had been then he'd sought out the Grey Lady. She had been most reluctant to speak to the headmaster. It was if she had known exactly what he'd wanted of her. She had refused to speak with him, but he'd kept coming to her, kept asking questions. And each and every time, she'd spoken in riddles, giving him nothing. "My lady." He greeted her with a soft smile. "Again you come to me to ask of my mother's diadem. And again I bid you to leave it be." The beautiful spectre pleaded. "If it were not so important, I would bother you no longer," Dumbledore said, taking a seat on a nearby bench and folding his hand upon his lap. "I know that it is hidden in this castle, and I know that you know where it lies. If I do not find it, and destroy it, then I fear our enemy will win. Why do you not care? You dare accuse me of having no feelings on the matter? It was I, Dumbledore. I who led him to it. I who gave it to him to twist and befoul to his evil purpose. Then redeem yourself," Dumbledore pleaded, leaning forward. "Why do you protect it when you know what it has become?" The ghost turned away from Dumbledore and stared into nothingness, folding her arms defensively. Dumbledore remained silent, waiting to see if he could press the ghost of Lady Helena Ravenclaw further. Or if she had enough for tonight. "Many have come to me in search of my mother's diadem, Dumbledore, and only one did I grant that knowledge to. He found it and perverted it. Made it something unclean. I allowed him to do this because I was foolish. Even hundreds of years after my death I have learned nothing. I protect it because it is all that remains of my blood. I protect it because when it is gone, there will be nothing that remains of my family, and I will have nothing more to tie me to this world. I protect it, Dumbledore, because I am afraid. And I hate my existence because I protect it." Dumbledore hung his head sadly. He understood the poor woman's feelings. He had done more than a few things he was not proud of, and he also understood her fear. It was part of the reason she had remained in this world after her death. "My dear lady," Dumbledore began, "the diadem is not the only thing that remains of your mother or your family. This school, which she helped found, will forever be a monument to your mother and her ideals. But to allow that tainted relic to remain goes against everything your mother stood for, and you know it. Would you, mother, you family, be proud of you for allowing it to remain? Do not try and pretend to know what my mother would think. The Grey Lady spun, her beautiful face morphing into something sinister. The blood that will be spilled because of your refusal to help will be on you. Dumbledore sighed as he stood. He knew that with the ghost now angered, it would be fruitless to continue. You care not for them, headmaster. You care only for the boy. The Grey Lady stared through Dumbledore. The headmaster turned to look back at the ghost who hovered ever closer. You forget that there are precious few secrets within these walls, headmaster. We know, but we have kept our silence because we are bound to serve the headmaster and keep his secrets. We all know that you are trying to protect the child, and that is most noble indeed. But you are also serving your own needs. I will not deny it. Dumbledore said. But by helping this boy, I will be saving countless lives. You would be saving countless lives as well. The Grey Lady regarded the headmaster for a long moment before speaking again. You truly mean to destroy it? She asked wearily. Not to wear it seeking knowledge, but to destroy it? I do. Dumbledore nodded. The boy knows where it lies. He helped teach all those others last year in the hidden room, though he knew not how close he was to discovering it. He simply needs to ask for it to show him what is hidden. He must be the one to allow you entrance, and together you must see it to the end. The Grey Lady gave a deep bow to Dumbledore and began to glide away. She called out over her shoulder. Goodbye, headmaster. I fear we shall see each other again in the next world very soon. And then Dumbledore saw a wondrous and magnificent sight as the Grey Lady kept gliding forward. But instead of passing through the wall, she began to evaporate as a strange warm light appeared where her heart would have been and grew in brightness until it blinded Dumbledore. Then, it was gone. The light, and the Grey Lady. My dear lady, I fear you are right. Dumbledore sighed, a tear falling from his eye at having witnessed the final passing of Helena Ravenclaw. Daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw. No one's seen him, and he's no one to be found on the damn map. Harry said, tossing the Marauder's map onto the table. It's like he's not even in the castle. Ever since he'd returned to Hogwarts, Harry had been trying to track Draco Malfoy's movements. But for all intents and purposes, Draco Malfoy had vanished. Harry had even snuck out of the castle in the middle of the night, to shack the Shrieking Shack to see if Malfoy was held up there. But it was empty. He was sitting on one of the couches in his and Susan's room. Susan was next to him, her legs tucked underneath. Harry had often told her she looked the most adorable when she sat like this. Neville sat on the floor across from Ron. The two were finishing their charms essay, the other having already finished it. Lavender, Hermione, and Hannah all sat on the second couch. Lavender with the latest copy of Witch Weekly, Hannah rubbing on Neville's shoulders and Hermione with a book on her lap. Though she wasn't reading it. We know he's still here, mate. Neville sighed as he wrote a bit more on his essay. We see him in the Great Hall at meal times. Not every meal. Hannah pointed out. What's weird is that when he does show up, he eats really fast. It's actually worse than watch Ron eat. Hermione said thoughtfully. Hey now, Ron's much more polite and far less disgusting nowadays. Lavender said, slightly offended. Ron's eating habits aside. Hermione said quickly before Ron had a chance to retort as well. Malfoy isn't showing up to classes. He hasn't been in a single defense or potions lesson since break. I heard Pansy telling Millicent that he wasn't even sleeping in his dorm. But why? Susan asked. What do you think he's hiding from? I don't think he's hiding from anything. Harry said, looking at each of his friends in turn. I think he's hiding to accomplish something. But I'll be damned if I know where he's hiding at. He's nowhere on the map. Well, does the map show every place in the castle? Hermione asked. I'm not sure. Harry sighed. I never ask Sirius. What about Remus? Ron asked. He had a hand in making it, didn't he? I'm such an idiot. Harry said, smacking his forehead. But it would take too long to get a letter to him and then a response. How can you be certain that he's up to anything? Lavender asked curiously. It's Malfoy. Ron said flatly, as if that explained it all. And we've talked about judging people. Lavender replied. When everyone looked up at her, she held up her hands defensively. Whoa, I'm not saying that the little prick is an angel. But what proof is there that he's doing anything bad? I mean really bad. Hagrid overheard Snape and Dumbledore arguing about Malfoy before break. Harry started, but Hannah cut him off. Harry, we all know how much you like Hagrid. But even you have to admit that sometimes he isn't the most reliable source of information. I know, but I just feel like I'm right. And when I get these feelings, Harry began. He's usually right. Hermione said wearily. Maybe not exactly right, but close enough. But we need proof. I know, I know. Harry said, tired of hearing that statement. He knew that nothing could be done until they had something showing that Draco was intending to do harm. Otherwise, it was just one person's word against another. Harry was about to suggest they start patrolling the corridors for any sign of Malfoy when there was a knock at the door. Harry got up from his spot and opened the door to find the headmaster standing there patiently. Professor Dumbledore, come in. Harry said quickly. Thank you, Harry. Ah, hard at work, I see. Very good. It should make your exams much easier if you prepare yourselves. Dumbledore smiled at the teen sitting before him. Harry, I find that I require your assistance. Would it be too much to ask for you to join me this evening? Sure. Harry said, puzzled at first, and then realization hit him like a freight train. The only reason Dumbledore would be coming to seek his help so late at night meant he had found the last Horcrux. He'd promised Harry that he could oversee the destruction of Voldemort's soul anchors. Let me put on my shoes and grab my wand, Sir Harry said quickly. He all but leapt over the couch where his shoes lay, and slipped them on quickly before snatching his wand from the table. Harry, wait. Susan said, getting to her feet. I just want a quick word, privately. Harry stammered, looking to Dumbledore, who nodded his consent. Susan took Harry by the wrist and took him into the bedroom. I know what you're about to do. I've been waiting for this since Dumbledore told us everything. I want you to do something for me, right now before you go. Susan said, a pleading look in her eye. Susie, I don't know that we have time for. Not that you prat. We can do that when you get back. I just want you to do something to make sure you come back. At this, Susan reached into her pocket and took out the sealed vial of golden potion she'd won in her first lesson with Slughorn. Harry gave her a curious look as she unstoppered the vial. I want you to drink half of this right now. That should give you about 6 hours of help. Susan, I can't. You can and you will. I'm not letting you leave until you do this for me, Harry. I know you'll be with Dumbledore and all, but I need to be sure that nothing is going to happen to you. I think you'll agree with me that I've never asked much of you. But I need you to do this for me. And I need you to do it right now. Harry sighed but nodded. Susan held the vial to his lips and watched as he swallowed the mouthful. Susan replaced the stopper and kissed him deeply. "How do you feel?" she asked when she broke the kiss. "Good," Harry replied with a strange smile. "Like, I don't know, like there's not going to be any problems. Like if I face Voldemort right now, that it wouldn't even be a fight." "Weird, huh?" "Nope. Now, hurry back before that wears off. And we'll see if you can get super lucky." Again Susan kissed Harry and then the two returned to the sitting room where their friends and Professor Dumbledore awaited. Harry gave a cheery wave as he followed the headmaster out. Susan's smile faded as soon as the door closed, and Hannah immediately got to her feet and hugged her best friend. "Did you give it to him?" Hermione asked, also getting to her. Susan nodded. And Hermione gave a soft sigh, turning to look at the door. "Then we shouldn't worry. It's Harry," Ron said flatly as he too turned to stare at the door. "We always worry. How did you find it?" "Sir?" Harry asked jauntily and Dumbledore smiled. "Am I correct in the assumption that Miss Bones gave you a bit of her luck potion?" the headmaster asked. "How did you know?" Harry asked, looking a bit surprised. "A few telltale signs. Your walk for one. You look quite confident, if I may say so. Also, the smile, which could only be caused by a small number of things. Luck potion being the least embarrassing for us both to discuss. Also, Professor Slughorn informed me that he awarded 2 vials to Miss Bones and Miss Granger. I have seen no evidence that either girl has used it, and I felt they were likely saving it for you and for this very moment." "You're good, Sir." Harry smirked. And Dumbledore chuckled. "I like to think so. So what are we doing?" Harry asked quickly. "First, we will be going to my office where I plan for us to destroy the Horcruxes I have in my possession. I am tired of their presence in my office, and wish to be rid of them. Then we shall be having a conversation in which I hope will lead us to where the final Horcrux lies in wait for us." "Sounds good." Harry smiled. And Dumbledore chuckled again at Harry's enthusiasm. The pair continued to Dumbledore's office in relative silence. Harry felt a strange sense of confidence he'd never felt before, as if he was positive they would encounter no problems in the quest that night. When they got into Dumbledore's office, the headmaster took out the cup, the ring and the locket he had shown Harry and Susan a few weeks previously. He then retrieved the sword of Godric Gryffindor from a case on the wall behind his desk. "I ask that you take a step back, please, Harry." Dumbledore smiled as he raised the sword over the cup. "I am unsure of what will happen, having never destroyed such an evil artifact before." Harry did as he was told, and he felt an urge to kneel down and cover his head as well. Trusting his instinct, Harry put his arms over his head just as Dumbledore swung the sword down upon his desk. Slicing into the golden cup. Harry would never be able to accurately describe what happened next. The office was filled with a pained cry, and there was a shockwave of energy that knocked Harry right onto his hind end. Much of the glass in the office shattered under the force of the explosion. Harry looked up and didn't see the headmaster. "Professor?" Harry asked. There was a strong smell of sulfur hanging in the air. Harry heard movement from behind the desk. Dumbledore had been knocked to the floor as well. He was sitting up as Harry reached him. "Well, that was quite interesting," the headmaster said. Harry helped the professor to his feet, and then bent down to retrieve Godric Gryffindor's sword. "Well, one down." Dumbledore chuckled. "Sir, maybe we should take this outside before your office is demolished." Harry said as he looked around at Dumbledore's ruined office. No. I think it best we finish this here. Besides, possessions can be replaced, and as I once told you, I fear I may have accumulated far too many. Now, shall we take care of the ring, or the locket next? Why not both? Harry asked. He reached out and lined the locket and the ring in such a manner that Dumbledore could destroy both with one swing. Ah, a good idea. Dumbledore smiled, taking the sword back from Harry. Once again, over there if you please. Harry nodded and resumed his position on the floor with his arms protecting his head. He watched as the headmaster raised the blade high over his head, and with a war cry that startled Harry, brought the sword down as hard and swift as he could. There was a huge thunderclap-like sound and Harry was tossed into the wall. Thankfully he was already leaning against it, so it wasn't so bad. Dumbledore however was thrown back violently and crashed into a low table and landed against a large bookshelf where several dozen heavy tomes avalanched upon him. Harry got to his feet and quickly began to dig the headmaster out of the deluge. Well, I am most certainly glad that is over with. Dumbledore smiled lightly. Harry noted that the professor had a few bruises forming on his head. He also appeared a bit unsteady. Would you like to sit down for a minute, sir? Harry asked. I would very much like that. Dumbledore smiled. Harry smiled in return and helped the professor to his desk, which was now blackened and scorched with 2 long cuts where the sword had struck. Harry found the headmaster's chair and set it upright for Dumbledore, who sat down gratefully and slipped his wand out of his robes, and gave it a wave, summoning a crystal bottle which was cracked. Oh dear. Dumbledore frowned. Well, there is still a bit left. Dumbledore conjured a glass and poured the remainder of the amber liquid into it and then drank it down in one gulp. Harry found a chair for himself and set it before the headmaster's desk and took a seat. We have dealt Lord Voldemort quite a blow this night, but when we are down, he shall be mortal once again. You said you found the last Horcrux. In a manner of speaking. Dumbledore said with a soft smile. I know where it is located, but I need your help in order to get inside. You see, I believe that the final hidden soul anchor. It is hidden inside the same room in which you taught the defense club last year. The room of requirement. Harry looked stunned. Indeed. The trick will be, as I understand it, in asking the room for just exactly the right thing. I do not believe that simply asking for the Horcrux will be enough. So we should take this time. I think I know already what to ask it for. Sir Harry smiled brightly. The Felix Felicis was conjuring a phrase in his mind that Harry was certain would give them exactly what they would need. Dumbledore's light blue eyes sparkled with delight as he got to his feet. Then we should not waste any more time. 10 minutes later. Harry was pacing back and forth in front of the section of wall which the room of requirement was hidden, concentrating on the phrase that had occurred to him in Dumbledore's office. We need find something that is hidden, he thought, focusing his mind on that single thought. He heard Dumbledore give a soft sigh as the door appeared and opened. I love Felix Felicis, Harry thought to himself. As they entered the room, Harry and Dumbledore were taken aback by the sight they bore witness to. The room was far larger than even the Great Hall. There were mountains upon mountains of books, brooms, cauldrons, clothing, and other junk. Harry saw a few vials of black liquid he was sure were some sort of illegal potions. There were fanged frisbees, broken scales, and several empty bottles of cooking sherry. Harry smiled as he realized he'd stumbled upon Professor Trelawney's secret dumping grounds. He then laughed as he realized that was the secret dumping ground for 100 generations of students. "Well, I simply had no idea," was all Dumbledore could say. Harry simply laughed. "I believe we may have our work cut out for us. Is there any way we could clear some of this away and make our search easier?" Harry asked. "I think we might be able to." "Let me see," Dumbledore said thoughtfully. He gave his wand a substantial flick and Harry heard rumbles as from all over the room books came soaring out of every corner of the room and began stacking themselves neatly along the wall too. Harry's immediate left. Harry watched delightedly as the headmaster conducted the books into stacks upon stacks. "I shall have to have Madame Pants come through and catalogue all of these. Perhaps our library will grow. I also think many of these could be used by students. They will of course need to be checked to make sure there is nothing dark in them." "Good idea," Harry said, understanding Dumbledore's meaning. Hogwarts did not need another event like his second year. When the last book settles in its new place with a soft thud, Dumbledore gave a heavy sigh. "Well, that's all of the books. My word, I believe there are more books hidden here than our entire library." Harry nodded his agreement as he took a closer look at some of the titles. "Now, let's try this." Dumbledore smiled and gave another sweeping wave of his wand. Harry heard the rumble as the mountains of detritus fell down as Dumbledore manipulated cauldrons into the very back of the room. The cauldrons clanged loudly, echoing throughout the room as they were piled high and out of the way. "Perhaps Harry, you should start looking." "What is it I'm looking for?" Harry asked. "A tiara-type crown with a raven upon it. The lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw." "I shall look in this direction. If you see anything that resembles what I have described, then call out, and I shall find you. Also, be careful, as I shall likely continue sorting some of this mess to ease our search." Harry gave a nod and headed down the nearest aisle, looking for anything that looked like a tiara. He wasn't sure if he was going in the right direction at all, but he felt like he was being pulled. Figuring it was the Felix Felicis, Harry followed it, keeping his eyes open, examining everything as quickly and carefully as possible. Harry strolled deeper and deeper into the room. Harry guessed the headmaster had started another round of sorting when several broken chairs soared over his head, making him duck slightly. The noise had yet to stop as mountains of contraband was disturbed and crumbled as it was shifted. And then Harry felt a strange darkness. A cold yet familiar presence that curdled Harry's blood. At the same time, the pull he'd been following surged and Harry rounded a corner and his eyes settled upon a bust of a rather ugly warlock with a very dusty wig upon its head, and setting upon that was a rather battered and tarnished-looking tiara. Harry stopped as he gazed upon it. It didn't appear to be anything more than a once fancy piece of costume jewelry. Harry leaned in to inspect it more closely and noticed there were two ravens covered in glittering stones on either side of the piece. Yet, Harry could feel waves of darkness rolling off of it. "Professor Dumbledore!" Harry shouted. There was no sound. It was then that Harry realized that the rumble of junk being moved had fallen silent. He shouted for the headmaster again, but got no response. He thought for only a second about how to act. He removed his wand from his pocket while grabbing the tiara, sure he would not find it again, and began to seek out the headmaster. Focused on his goal. Harry could feel the luck potion guiding him through the maze of rubbish in search of Dumbledore. His search came to an end when he walked right into an invisible barrier and fell right on his bottom. "What the bloody hell?" Harry asked, rubbing his face where he'd smacked into the barrier. He got to his feet and was about to call out again when he heard a very familiar voice speaking triumphantly. Malfoy? Harry asked himself. He began feeling his way along the barrier, trying to find where Malfoy and Professor Dumbledore were. As he'd also heard the headmaster's voice now, Harry had to maneuver around a large mountain of rubbish until he found another somewhat clear walkway that was blocked by the invisible barrier. This time, however, Harry could see Dumbledore. He was standing before a large wardrobe. The wardrobe sat in an area that appeared as if it had been meticulously cleared away, and not by magic. Harry noticed that Dumbledore had his hands folded before him, and he was listening to Draco Malfoy, who had his wand leveled right at Dumbledore's heart. Harry also saw that Draco had Dumbledore's wand in his other hand. Things didn't go to plan though, did they? Dumbledore asked. You very nearly killed a classmate. You're talking about Bones. Draco sneered. I wish she had died. It would have given me a bit more favor. No, her friends had to interfere, and don't think I don't know that it was Snape who fixed her up. I'm not stupid. I know that's why you were teaching defense before the holiday. And the mead that killed Professor Slughorn? Dumbledore asked. I had no idea you had problems with the late professor. That was meant for you as well. But the fat load just couldn't part with it. He did it to himself. Draco said, his tone becoming more triumphant. And so, here we are. May I ask what happens next? When I finish, I summon my lord, and he kills Potter. Then the New World Order begins. Draco smiled. Goodbye, Dumbledore. Avada Kedavra. Harry shouted as the acidic green spell hit the headmaster right in the heart, slamming him into the old wardrobe and slumped to the ground. His lifelight completely extinguished. Draco rolled up his sleeve and touched his wand to his forearm just as the barrier fell, and he heard Harry. Draco turned to stare in surprise, having apparently being unaware that Harry had been right there the whole time. Potter. Draco sneered and then smiled as he turned to look at the wardrobe. You're just in time to meet your fate. Draco Malfoy had finished repairing the damned wardrobe at last, and now he was readying himself for what he had to do next. He had spent months using different spells to reconnect the wardrobe, hidden in the room of requirement, in order to create the doorway for his master and other Death Eaters to enter the castle unnoticed. It had taken far longer than his master wished, and much of Draco's well-being. He'd lived in that room for too long, missing classes, and meals. Draco barely looked like himself anymore. He was thin and his eyes had dark purple circles under them. His normally sleek hair was greasy and limp. But it didn't matter to Draco. Soon, he'd have everything he wished for. He had only to finish the mission his master had given him. Tonight was the night. Draco was going to call forth his master and kill Albus Dumbledore. Draco figured that Dumbledore would be so focused on fighting the Dark Lord, that Draco could easily kill the old headmaster without having to fight him at all. But luck, it seemed, was with him. As he made his way to the room of requirement, he heard the headmaster's voice along with Harry Potter's. Draco had hidden himself behind a suit of armor where he could spy on the duo as they passed him in the hall, unaware of Draco's proximity, and was startled to see them conjuring the room of requirement. Draco knew this was his opportunity. If he could capture Potter and then kill Dumbledore, he'd be able to call forth his master, and have Potter right there for his master. He would be rewarded beyond imagining. both of the Dark Lord's enemies delivered to him. Perhaps he would surpass his Aunt Bellatrix as the Dark Lord's favorite. Draco timed it perfectly. He waited until both Harry and Dumbledore had entered the room and slipped inside just as the door began to shut. He immediately went to his right and ducked behind a pile of broken chairs that were stacked up 10 feet high. There he waited for his next opportunity. He watched in curiosity as Dumbledore waved his wand and thousands of books soared from all over the room and began stacking themselves. Draco tried to listen to the conversation between Harry and Dumbledore, but the noise of junk being tussled about made it impossible to understand what the two were speaking about. So Draco had to wait. Draco held his wand in his hand, keeping it raised, just waiting for his opportunity to strike. He wasn't sure if he could kill Dumbledore and incarcerate Potter before Potter reacted. As much as he was loath to admit it, Draco knew that Potter was much faster than he was, though Draco knew he could hurt Potter far more than Potter dared attempt. Potter was far too noble to use anything worse than a stunner. Draco was beginning to convince himself that he was covered perfectly, and it would take Potter at least a few seconds before he figured out where Draco was hidden. But then Dumbledore sent Harry down an aisle in search of something, while the old headmaster began walking down another. Draco couldn't believe his luck as he waited a moment before following the headmaster, who was heading in the direction of the wardrobe which Draco's master would soon be called through. Draco kept his distance and walked silently, watching as Dumbledore waved his wand and a mess of broken wands hovered up in the air and were sent somewhere deeper in the room. Dumbledore continued on, seemingly unaware he was being followed until he came to the clearing where Draco had been hiding. The wardrobe was in the center of a cleared circle. There was a table and a chair with a rusted candle holder where Draco had read books trying to figure out how to repair the broken cabinet. There was also a pile of cloth and clothing that Draco had fashioned into a bed where he'd slept many, many nights. Draco knew he was likely not going to get a better shot. Keeping his wand high and ready, he came out into the open as Dumbledore was inspecting the wardrobe. "Good evening, Draco," Dumbledore said evenly. The headmaster turned slowly to face Draco, an expectant smirk on his face. Malfoy wasted no time in disarming Dumbledore, who didn't even attempt to fight. Draco was too focused on his goal to realize that Dumbledore hadn't even attempted to protect himself, or that he'd known Draco was there at all. "I was wondering when you would show yourself. So this is where you have been hiding. May I ask what it is you've been doing in here?" Dumbledore asked politely. "Preparing," Draco said softly. "Preparing?" Dumbledore asked, arching an eyebrow. "Preparing for my lord to come start his rule," Draco said quickly. "He means to rule from Hogwarts then?" Dumbledore frowned. "It's his birthright. He's the sole remaining heir of Salazar Slytherin. And once I'm finished with you, then I'll call him. I'll be rewarded and given a place at his side." Draco sneered. He was unaware that somewhere in the room, Harry was now calling out to Dumbledore. Malfoy was unaware that Dumbledore had cast 2 spells before he'd addressed Draco. A privacy spell, and a protective barrier. They were essentially alone. "I take it you have planned this out very carefully. You have know exactly what you intend to do?" Dumbledore asked politely. "I've been working right under your nose, and you haven't had a clue." Draco snipped. "Oh, but I did. I have known since before the school year started that you have been Lord Voldemort's newest inductee. I was informed the night you were branded, in fact. In fact, I believe that I am far more aware of what you have been up to than you believe. I know that you have avoided Professor Snape's offers to help you. He was trying to steal my glory. Didn't you know? Snape's been spying on you for the Dark Lord. Draco snapped. I am afraid it is you who are mistaken, Draco. Professor Snape is indeed a spy, but he spies for me. It was he who told me about your being marked. It was he who told me of your mission to kill me. It was Professor Snape who warned me of your growing knowledge of the dark arts, no doubt taught to you by your dear Aunt Bellatrix. It was on my order that Professor Snape offered to help you. It was my hope that you could be turned from your path, and brought back into the light. Dumbledore smiled hopefully, though it didn't reach his blue eyes. I have no desire to become some weakling defender of the light. I want real power, and my lord will give it to me. Draco smiled malevolently. Yes. I can see that you are truly lost, and that you truly have no wish to save your soul. Dumbledore sighed. You have made your plans. However, things didn't go to plan though, did they? Dumbledore asked. You very nearly killed a classmate. You're talking about Bones. Draco sneered. I wish she had died. It would have given me a bit more favor. No, her friends had to interfere, and don't think I don't know that it was Snape who fixed her up. I'm not stupid. I know that's why you were teaching defense before the holiday. You wanted him to figure out what the thing was cursed with so he could save her life. And the mead that killed Professor Slughorn? Dumbledore asked. Clearly you were behind that as well. I had no idea you had problems with the late professor. That was meant for you as well. He was buying a Christmas gift for you. I was in the Three Broomsticks when he made the purchase. But the fat load just couldn't part with it. He did it to himself. Draco said, his tone becoming more triumphant. And so, here we are. May I ask what happens next? Dumbledore asked. After I kill you, I summon my lord, and he kills Potter. Then the New World Order begins. Draco smiled. Goodbye, Dumbledore. Avada Kedavra. Draco felt a surge of triumph course through his veins as he stared at the fallen leader of the light. The so-called greatest wizard of the age. Now a husk upon the floor, his face forever frozen in that arrogant look of superiority he always had. Draco rolled up his sleeve, preparing to call forth his master when he heard the shout of rage. Turning, Draco was shocked to find Potter standing behind him, his wand leveled. Potter! Draco sneered and then smiled as he turned to look at the wardrobe. You're just in time to meet your fate. Draco looked towards the wardrobe and pressed the tip of his wand to his forearm, grimacing in pain. But it was nothing compared to having his wand hand blown apart, which is exactly what happened next. Harry had hesitated only the barest fraction of a moment before he realized what Draco had done. He fired off his spell and winced as he watched Draco's right hand explode in a shower of bone and blood. Draco fell to his knees in agonizing pain, holding the now bloody stump of what used to be his hand to his chest. You bastard! Draco shouted in rage at Harry, who looked surprised at what he'd done. Shut your mouth, you sick fucking bastard! Harry shouted back, the anger returning to his eyes having gotten over his shock. He noticed Draco turning to look at the wardrobe anxiously, and Harry, thanks in part he knew, to Felix Felicis, realized that it was more than just a wardrobe. It meant something to Draco, and that could not be good. Malfoy had said that Lord Voldemort would be coming, and now, the Malfoy scion was watching the cabinet with unveiled excitement. "I'm going to love watching him kill you, Potter," Draco snarled. "Reducto!" Harry shouted. It was quite simply the most powerful blasting hex Harry had ever conjured. The cabinet exploded, sending hunks of wood in every direction. Harry held up his hands to protect his face. "No!" Draco screamed, getting to his feet and rushing Harry, who slipped to Draco's left, turning his wand on Draco. Draco crashed to the floor, having lost his balance, and rolled to his knees to find Harry practically standing over him. "Give me a single reason to let you continue living, Malfoy. I watched you kill Dumbledore. I know that you were behind what happened to Susan. You're a Death Eater. So honestly, I would love to hear why I should let you live," Harry said, his eyes narrowed, his wand aimed right between Draco's eyes. Draco Malfoy had faced Harry many times over the years, but never in his memory had he seen the look of cold fury in Potter's eyes. Malfoy had also never once felt real fear whenever he'd faced Potter. But up until this moment, there had never been a serious threat of Potter doing any sort of real damage to the Malfoy scion. There had been taunts, threats, and the occasional spell traded. But Draco had never ever been seriously hurt. Now here he was lying on the ground with his arm bleeding badly, his hand completely gone. But Draco didn't think that Potter could actually bring himself to kill anyone. "Potter, listen to me." Draco held up his hand, still holding the stump of his wand hand close to his chest. Draco tossed Dumbledore's wand to Harry to show that he was unarmed now. "Listen to me, Potter. You have no idea." "I don't want to hear excuses, Draco," Harry said coldly. "I just saw you murder the headmaster. I know you're the one who tried to kill Susan. You're dangerous, and I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else. Ever." "Madame Rosmerta gave it to her," Draco said quickly. "You were doing it," Harry shouted. "You played the puppet master, I know you did." "How did you do it? Come on, Draco, they say confession is good for the soul." "The longer you talk, the longer I live?" Draco asked. He shook his head and got to his feet. "Go to hell, Potter. One day soon, the Dark Lord will find you, and he's going to make you suffer in ways you can never imagine. Maybe he'll make you watch as he kills Granger, or Weasley. Or maybe, you'll have to watch helplessly as he allows his faithful to have their way with Bones before they kill her." Harry closed the gap and shoved his wand into Draco's neck, shaking with rage as he stared into the steel-grey eyes of Malfoy. "You can't do it, Potter." Draco smiled mockingly. His face was ashen now at the loss of blood from his wrist. "You can't kill me, you're too damn noble to lower yourself to take someone's life." "You think so?" Harry asked. "I know it. You and your fucking Gryffindor nobility. You're the White Knight, Potter. The fucking Gryffindor golden boy. You don't scare me, Potter. I know that you're not going to kill me." "Dip Indo," Harry whispered. Draco's eyes went wide with shock as his throat opened up and blood spilled down the front of his robes. He grabbed onto Harry's robes, his eyes wide with terrified shock that Harry had actually just slit his throat open. As he felt his life begin slipping away, he tried to plead for Harry to save him, but Potter simply stared coldly at his rival. And then Harry did something that shocked even himself. He healed the cut on Draco's throat, and kicked the boy to the ground. "You're right, Malfoy, I'm no murderer, Draco," Harry said flatly. "Unless I'm pushed. I just wanted you to know that I could have killed you right here, right now. But I think I'd rather see you kissed by the Dementors. I want you to wish in that last moment before the Dementor lowers its hood and takes your soul, that I had killed you." Harry stepped away from Draco and turned to Dumbledore. His heart broke at the sight of the fallen headmaster. For all his flaws, Harry still respected the man. Harry had had so few role models in his life. And even though Dumbledore had made more than a handful of mistakes in regards to Harry's life, he was still a good man, and had not deserved to be murdered. Harry then noticed the sword of Gryffindor sticking out of Dumbledore's robes, and went to grab it. Harry still had to destroy the Horcrux. He had to finish what the headmaster had started. Harry turned and walked back to where the barrier where he had dropped the diadem of Ravenclaw. He stared at the Horcrux for a long moment, allowing his anger to build. He raised the sword and reminding himself of how truly evil Lord Voldemort was, Harry slashed the great sword down and sliced right through the old battered tiara. There was another explosion of energy and a loud blood-curdling scream, just as there had been in the headmaster's office, and Harry was thrown back, landing in a heap next to the body of Dumbledore. "It's finished," Harry said wearily as he sat up. He could feel the euphoria of the luck potion wearing off, and sighed. Harry didn't feel that he'd been lucky at all. He'd seen Dumbledore killed right in front of him and had been unable to save him. Harry turned to look at Dumbledore's body, and slowly and reverently shut the old man's eyes. "I'm sorry, sir," he whispered. He looked at the old man's body and felt his eyes sting with sad tears. Harry realized that he would need to find Professor McGonagall or another teacher, and he would have to tell them what had happened in here tonight. Harry suddenly felt like he had the night Cedric died, and he felt his throat close with the overwhelming emotions. "Potter." Harry turned and found Malfoy rising to his knees, Dumbledore's wand in his good hand. His face far more pale than ever, and his steel-grey eyes were murderous slits. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," Draco grimaced. His voice was raw and hoarse, like he was suffering a bad sore throat. "Avada Reducto," Harry snapped, and Draco's eyes went wide with horror as his chest was blown apart. Harry could only stare in utter disbelief as Draco Malfoy fell forward in a pool of gore, and died. It wasn't until the next afternoon that classes were cancelled and the students were assembled in the Great Hall where they were informed of Professor Dumbledore's passing. The students were not made aware of the cause of the headmaster's passing, and were simply told that it had been peaceful. Professor McGonagall announced that she would be acting headmistress for the remainder of the year, with Professor Flitwick standing in as deputy headmaster. The students were then informed that Draco Malfoy's body had been discovered in a secret room, and that he had died of malnutrition and magical exhaustion. These reasons did not seem to appease the students, and soon rumors were flying about the real cause of Draco's death. And the strange coincidence that both he and the headmaster died in the same night. The most believable rumor that surfaced was that Draco and Dumbledore had dueled and killed each other. Though many scoffed at the notion, it was the least ridiculous story that was circulating. A precious few people knew the truth of the events that had taken place in the room of requirement the previous night, and they were now assembled in the headmistress' office. Professor McGonagall, who seemed reluctant to sit in the chair of her predecessor. Amelia Bones, who'd been called to the school the night before to investigate and question the lone witness. Professor Snape, who'd been the first teacher whom Harry Potter had found and brought back to the room of requirement to help, and Harry himself, who had been at the center of the events. "Please have a seat, Potter." McGonagall smiled weakly to Harry, who had only just arrived. Her eyes looked puffy, and Harry wondered if she'd been crying. Madam Bones turned and gave a sympathetic nod to Harry, who responded in kind. Professor Snape stood near the back of the office, looking for all the world as if he were lost. Harry had never seen this particular man looking so pathetic and wondered just how badly he'd been affected by the passing of Albus Dumbledore. Harry was afraid he was going to have to repeat everything he'd told these three the night before. He wasn't sure if he could do it again, it had been most exhaustive. He had eventually given copies of his memories of the night's events for them to study at their leisure, and was finally allowed to go to the hospital wing, where he was given dreamless sleeping potion for the night. "Mr. Potter, I've asked you here because we have learned a great deal of things during the course of the day, and felt that you should be made aware of these things, as they affect you a great deal. The most important being that Professor Snape was informed earlier today through certain contacts that you know who has vanished." Harry looked up, suddenly interested. He glanced at Amelia and Snape, both who nodded that what he was being told was in fact true. "Vanished?" Harry asked skeptically. "I am told that the Dark Lord had stepped through the sister cabinet in Borgin and Burke's last evening when Draco summoned him. The plan was for the Dark Lord to enter the school after Dumbledore had been dealt with by young Malfoy, and drag you before the entirety of the student body, where he would kill you once and for all," Snape said flatly. "Our best guess is that when you destroyed the cabinet, the Dark Lord and those who had entered with him became trapped, much as Montague did the year previously. Professor Snape informed me of the whereabouts of the other cabinet, and I dispatched several Aurors to confiscate it this morning. It was destroyed." Amelia picked up the story from there. "Our hope is that Lord Voldemort will be trapped there indefinitely." "So Voldemort can't return?" Harry asked hopefully. "We can't say for sure," Snape said evenly, staring out the window. "The Dark Lord has a wealth of power at his command. He may yet find his way back to our world. But the Horcruxes are destroyed, so he can't use them to come back, right?" Harry asked, his eagerness growing. "One remains," Snape said sadly. "But I thought Harry destroyed the last one last night?" Amelia asked, confused. "Potter destroyed the last inanimate one. One more remains within the Dark Lord's familiar, Nagini. But it shall be dealt with in short order," Snape said. "Dumbledore tasked me with destroying it, and I'm taking that as his final wish. I will not rest until the damnable thing is destroyed." "So what does this all mean?" Harry asked, clearly confused. "The war is over, Harry." McGonagall sighed. "Before it truly began, you helped end the conflict and rid us of he who must dash." "Voldemort," Harry said quickly. "If he's truly gone, there don't feed his legend." "Very wise, Harry." Amelia nodded. "What about his followers?" Harry asked, turning to Amelia. "Should I be worried that they might come after me?" "We know the identity of his inner circle, and we will use all our resources to find and capture them," Amelia ensured the others. "I have arranged to have Lucius Malfoy and a few others brought to the Ministry for questioning. Those who cooperate will remain alive in Azkaban, those who do not will be administered the Dementor's kiss. This is at the request of the Minister of Magic. He wants this whole thing put to rest as quickly as possible. It appears that Minister Scrimgeour is much more open-minded about the ways to deal with terrorists. McGonagall gave an approving nod. Harry looked at the three adults in the room, two of whom were looking back at him. Professor Snape, Harry said, rising to his feet. Is it really over? I mean, do you think Lord Voldemort might actually find a way to come back? Snape appeared slightly stunned at the respectful way in which Potter had addressed him. Then he realized that it might have been due to all that had been revealed to the boy. Snape hated that his secrets had been revealed, and yet, he could not say he was displeased with how things had changed between himself and his rival's son. I do, Potter. However, we have a few factors to consider. The first being that with his Horcruxes gone, Snape turned to face the room at large. He will be mortal upon his return. Also, given what happened to Montague during his time within the Vanishing Cabinet, it stands to reason that the Dark Lord will also experience the same things. A lack of nourishment for one. When he is once again normal, his body will crave for what all of our bodies need: food, water, and the like. The second factor in which we should consider is time. His body will succumb to the ravages of time, just as we all must. If enough time passes, it stands to reason that he might actually die on his own. And finally, I have no doubt that he will exhaust himself magically trying to find a way out. Without the means to replenish his core, he may kill himself quicker. How likely do you think that is? McGonagall asked, looking more hopeful than Harry. Snape actually shrugged. I have no idea. So. Harry looked around again. What should we do? There was silence between them all for a long time. You live. Everyone turned to look at the portrait of Professor Dumbledore that was now upon the wall. Harry thought that he resembled the Dumbledore he'd first laid eyes on in his first year, though it would have been hard for most other people to tell the difference. He was seated in a chair that looked much like the high-back chair that was sitting behind the headmaster's desk. He was smiling down upon them all with that kind, grandfatherly smile he always used to wear, his eyes twinkling merrily, even in a painting. You must go on living as if there is no threat to you or the world, he said. Live each and every day of your life to its fullest. You have been given a gift, and it would be a shame if you wasted it preparing for a threat that may never arise. Professor, I'm sorry that I couldn't. Harry, I refuse to allow you to finish that thought. You were no to blame, nor will I allow you to shoulder the blame for things that were beyond your control. You have shouldered such guilt and pain, and now it is time for you to release that, and move on. Just as Sirius would have been distressed to know you were not living your life, so shall I be. Yes, Sir. Harry smiled, a tear falling down his cheek. Now, I believe that you should start by going to spend time with your friends, Harry. Dumbledore smiled. Harry turned to look at Amelia, who nodded and smiled. Off you go, Potter, McGonagall said. Harry didn't have to be told twice, and quickly went to find Susan and the others, leaving 3 adults and a multitude of portraits smiling, including Professor Snape. Though his looked more like a grimace than a smile. No one could have pictured a more beautiful day or setting for a wedding. The sun was high and bright, but it was the perfect temperature, thanks to the light breeze blowing from the east. A large magical tent had been erected, and people were taking their seats, talking excitedly about the pending nuptials. Most of the attendees were only barely out of their teens, some of which were still attending Hogwarts, and could not believe that they had even received an invitation. Molly Weasley was taking a last look at the arrangements before taking her own seat. She had been flattered when she'd been asked to cater the event and had spent the better part of the week preparing dishes. She would have done it for free, but the couple had insisted that they pay for all the ingredients, and a more than generous fee, which they had insisted Molly accept. She had tried to protest, but her husband, Arthur, had accepted for her. "Ginny, I think that's enough. I don't think we can improve this anymore." Molly sighed, holding her shaking hands tightly to her bosom. "It's hard to perfect perfection, Mum." The 18-year-old Weasley girl smiled as she wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulder. "I'm sure they will be pleased." "That's very sweet of you, dear." Molly smiled. "Mrs. Weasley," Alicia Spinnet said softly, "we're almost ready. You should really take your seats now." "Oh, thank you." Mrs. Weasley smiled as she and her daughter turned to follow the former Gryffindor chaser out into the afternoon sun. "You've done a marvelous job, if you don't mind my saying." "I'd like to think so." Alicia smiled. "It's given me a lot of good ideas for when Fred and I finally tie the knot." "Let me know if he doesn't propose soon, and I'll have a few words with him." Molly winked conspiratorially. Both Ginny and Alicia giggled heartily. "Ah, there you are, Molly." Mr. Weasley smiled, rising from his seat and taking his wife's hand and sitting back down. "I just saw him. He's quite a bundle of nerves." "Oh, the poor dear." Molly smiled. "Well, they haven't seen each other in a year," Ginny pointed out from behind her mother and father. "How would you be if the first time you two were seeing each other after that long was at your own wedding?" "I think we got him all calmed down." Fred Weasley smiled as he and his twin George took seats. George was escorting his fiancée, Angelina Johnson, who greeted the other Weasleys in turn. "What did you do?" Molly Weasley hissed, and both twins held up their hands in surrender but were saved from explanations by Angelina. "They just talked with him. Bill's still in there right now. He's going to be fine." She smiled, and kissed George's cheek. "They both behaved themselves." "I should hope so," Molly said with an air of finality. "Ah, there they are." Mr. Weasley smiled as he waved a hand. Two more red-headed men and a very stunning-looking blonde woman who appeared to be 8 months pregnant came and joined them. "Oh, Fleur dear, you should really get off your feet," Molly said, brushing the seat next to her off so her first daughter-in-law could take a seat. "Thank you, mon mere." Fleur Weasley smiled and eased herself into the seat. "Has he calmed down?" Mr. Weasley asked Bill, his eldest son. Both Bill and Charlie Weasley nodded heartily. "Just convinced him it was another game of Quidditch and that it was no big deal." Charlie smirked. "Any chance we might be attending another wedding soon?" Molly asked slyly. Charlie simply shook his head and smacked his forehead loudly. "Any chance you'll get off my back about it?" he asked. "Sure," Ginny remarked. "Just as soon as you bring home a suitable girl." The other Weasleys laughed at Charlie's discomfort. There was a swell of music and a thin elderly wizard approached the front of the assembled where he turned to face everyone with a huge smile on his face. He adjusted his spectacles slightly and smoothed the front of his robes and then turned to nod at a young man who approached the front of the dais where the man stood. Harry Potter still had the unruly black hair of his youth and the emerald green eyes, though his famous lightning bolt scar had faded considerably over the last 2.5 years. He was still thin, though he looked far more muscular than he had ever been in his school days. He was dressed in the formal dress robes of the Corps which he had just graduated from. He stood straight and proud, beaming at the far end of the tent. Music began to play and every head turned as Hermione Granger began walking down the aisle with her escort, Neville Longbottom. Both were smiling back at Harry, who was now bouncing a bit where he stood. From near the back of the tent came a loud honking sound as Rubeus Hagrid blew his nose and a tablecloth-sized handkerchief. When they reached the front of the tent, Hermione hugged Harry tightly and kissed his cheek before heading to her place. Neville clasped his longtime friend's hand and congratulated Harry. When Neville took his place, everyone turned again to watch as Hannah Abbott was escorted by Ron Weasley. There was a very audible gasp from Lavender Brown as she watched Ron walking Hannah down the aisle. Ron and Lavender's breakup had been legendary by Hogwarts standard, and they had been apart for almost the entirety of their 7th year. However, a few people were aware that the couple was reconciling. Both of them had realized that their lives were better when they were together. Ron gave Lavender a meaningful wink as he passed the blonde Gryffindor, which Lavender returned. Hannah grasped Harry tightly as she kissed his cheek. "I am so happy for you two. I just wanted you to know that I couldn't in a million years picture anyone better for her than you." Before Harry could respond, Hannah was taking her place. Ron took Harry's hand, and then suddenly pulled his best friend close and hugged him hard, surprising Harry with this sudden outburst of emotion. Ron quickly took his place, wiping frantically at his eyes, making more than a few people chuckle, and Hagrid blow his nose again. Next came Remus Lupin, who was escorting the aunt of the bride, Amelia Bones. Amelia couldn't have looked more pleased as the werewolf walked her to her seat. She kept her eyes locked on Harry's, prouder of him than she could have ever expressed. Not only had he graduated with the first full class of new Aurors the Ministry had seen in a decade, but he had been the top of his class. She had been keeping a very close eye on his progress, as she had personally recommended him for the advance program. He had not disappointed her. Both Remus and Amelia shook hands with Harry, and then hugged him before they went to their seats. Amelia did not sit, but turned to look at the end of the tent. And the entirety of the congregation rose as one to watch as Susan Bones entered the tent looking more beautiful than anyone could have ever imagined. Her red hair was done in a very elegant knot that had taken Hannah 3 hours to get right. She wore a tasteful, yet elegant pair of earrings with a matching necklace, each containing emeralds. Her dress hugged her top before blossoming out at her waist. Susan was already tearing up as she approached the dais where her betrothed stood waiting, looking quite emotional himself. When Harry offered his hand to Susan as she drew close enough, more than a handful of whimpers could be heard as people tried to hold in their sobs. Hannah took the flowers Susan had held and she and Harry took the two-step to stand before the wizard who would be officiating the ceremony. As Harry and Susan took their vows, the air was filled with the unmistakable sound of Phoenix song. It filled every heart with warmth and joy. Harry could not look away from Susan as he spoke the words he'd spent 7 months perfecting for this moment. Susan only barely made it through her own vows, having to stop 3 times to prevent herself from breaking down completely. When the wizard finally allowed the couple to kiss, a giant explosion rocked the tent as an amazing display of Weasley fireworks was sent into the air. Fred and George high-fived each other as Harry and Susan turned to face their guests and were officially introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Potter. As Harry took Susan into his arms for their first official dance, he couldn't help think of how strange his life had been. When he was a child, he had never known love. It had been a strange concept to him. It truly wasn't until the betrothal contract surfaced that he was given a real chance to understand this strange and powerful emotion. He had been told that his greatest power was his ability to love. Harry had not understood what that had meant until the moment he saw Susan coming down the aisle towards and realized that it had been love that had saved his life. Love had been the reason he would have risked his life to stop a terrorist hell-bent on destroying the world. As Harry looked around the room at other couples joining them on the dance floor, he began to fully understand the real power love held. Ron and Lavender had broken up, but their love for each other was so strong that it could not let them move on without each other. Love had been cruel to Hermione, but she had needed that cruelty to understand that there were more important things in life than study and grades. It had also taken a Muggle boy by the name of Leon, Hermione had met at university. The boy she danced with looked completely flabbergasted by the people and the shows of magic he was witnessing, though he was clearly enjoying himself. It was love that had kept Hannah and Neville together through some very trying times. Through Neville's grandmother's passing and his ascension to Lord Longbottom, or Hannah's family's implosion had they questioned their own relationship. They had simply gritted their teeth and sought solace in each other. Here, on this day where his friends and family had come to celebrate love, did Harry think that he was truly beginning to understand just how strong a magic love truly was. 2 years later, when Susan gave birth to their first child, a girl they named Lily Amelia, that Harry fully understood how powerful love really was. Dumbledore had been right all along. Please like and subscribe.